On the night of July 15th, factions of the Turkish military linked to the Gulenist terror cult launched a failed coup attempt. Journalists across the country had a front row seat to the chaos. Now, in the aftermath, they're turning their attention to a wounded nation and spotlighting the alleged mastermind behind the carnage. The coup attempt was defeated, but not without a horrible cost. Around 250 people were dead and almost 3,000 were injured. Journalists had to transition from being targets during the coup to detailing the destruction after it. Bombs that were launched from F-16s wiped out the police head of Special Operations Department. Police officers never had a chance to run. Damage of the Turkish Grand National Assembly, which was hit 7 times by aircrafts under command of the plotters, indicated that the target was the Prime Minister and senior staff officials. Hospitals all across Turkey were overflowing with people suffering from bullet wounds and other injuries. Health reporter Fatma Demir Togat had never seen anything like it before.
I was especially moved by 2 people's stories. One was Sabri Ünal. He's a computer programming living in Istanbul. When he found out about the coup attempt, he walked for an hour and a half and almost made it to the bridge. He saw a tank rapidly approaching him and tried to stop it. Do you know how he tried to stop it? By throwing stones. He tried to stop a tank by throwing 3 small stones. He says he knows that this was perhaps childish, but there was no other way to defend himself, and then he threw himself under the tank into the gap between the tracks. He made his way out alive. He then sees a second tank approaching, but when he tries to escape it, like he did the first time, his right arm gets crushed by the tank. When we speak to these people's families, nobody tells them what to say, but they all say the same thing. If the nation needs our fight, then we shall fight for it. I can sacrifice all my children and even grandchildren for this nation.
People were healing. The nation was healing. Journalists were trying to catch their breath. Shortly after the coup attempt, journalist Firat met with President Erdogan. The president personally comforted Firat's daughter.
We spoke about children and the trauma that children went through. It's a very serious thing. President Erdogan has grandchildren of his own, and we know his love for children. We spoke about how we need to overcome this and get rid of this trauma.
They were detailing the destruction from the night of the coup, but they were also trying to fathom how a secretive organization could exist within the state and carry out such a bloody operation. The name Fethullah Gulen was suddenly everywhere. The former imam from Turkey lives in self-imposed exile in the US. He heads the Gulenist organization, a global secretive network and terror cult he founded in 1992. Turkey says he was behind the failed coup. Gulen has denied any involvement. He claims his organization is only concerned with education, religion, and philanthropy. But Turkish journalists have been digging deeper. People who used to work for Gulen, like Hüseyin Gülarce, says he's not who he claims to be. Gülarce used to be a senior administrator at the Gulen-linked Zaman newspaper. But he said he distanced himself 3 years ago when Gulen began to interfere with politics and began discussing plans to infiltrate the military. So, who is Fethullah Gulen? A pious religious cleric? Or the leader of a terrorist organization that plotted to take over Turkey?
Fethullah Gülen bir bedende iki insan.
Fethullah Gulen is two separate people, all in one body. The first side of him is a righteous companion of the Prophet who is devout and beloved, but the other side resembles a person who is able to commit all sorts of illegal activities and break the law. My second description shows how this person was able to callously order the deaths of innocent people during the coup attempt of July the 15th. He's a vicious criminal that betrayed his nation and people.
Önlerini kessin, bir şey olmaya imkan vermesin. Allahümme ehzimhum ve zelzilhum.
In the documentary The Gulen, investigative journalist Serkan Koç takes a microscopic look at Gulen and the reach of his organization.
Fethullah Gülen çok şirin görünümlü bir kişidir.
So Fethullah Gulen looks like a very gracious person. He has two faces. One appears to be a very sympathetic, kind and embracing person, and there is his other face which bears his true intentions, and he uses this face during the process of training members of his organization and forming the central skeletal crew of his system. Fethullah Gulen presents himself to the organization as a religious cleric. However, within the organization, he has created a system of hierarchy. The highest rank is that of Fethullah Gulen, the top imam in the universe. Below him is the leading imam of the world and leading imam of continents, and then the leading imams of countries, and so on. They even have much smaller cells called houses of light. So when we look at the organization, we see that, in fact, it does not look innocent at all. Why would you create a little secret cells in a country that most of the time are not even aware of each other's existence and have no communication? You must have some sort of ulterior motive to do this. This motive came to light on the 15th of July.
Mutlaka bir şeyi vardır.
Gulen's organization is believed to have billions of dollars in capital, and estimates are that it's funding more than 2,000 schools across the world, the majority of which are located in Turkey and Central Asia. The Gulenist publicly stated goal has always been to boost education. But Gülarce says that when he began questioning the group's motives, he was paid a visit by Gulen's right-hand man. What he heard completely alienated him from the movement.
Dedi ki, Hoca Efendi,
He even said the first goal is to take over the Turkish armed forces. He even said armed forces were like a human arm. And he explained that schools, boarding schools, prep schools, universities and hospitals were all bandages to hold this arm intact. This is the first time I heard something like this. This man told me that Gulen was saying, if we do not take over the Turkish armed forces, Turkey would not survive in this region. Turkey's future will be in ruins if we do not seize it.
Channel 24 News Director Ömer Özkok shares his colleagues' concern.
Türkiye'nin demokrasi tarihine baktığınız zaman
When you take a look at Turkey's history, you'll see that the army has intervened against democratic rulers and gained control several times through coups. If you take over the army, then you have control of the country's political power as well.
Türk siyasetinin hep içinde yer almış.
The military's secular nature would present a challenge for a so-called religious-minded organization like the Gulenists. Religious groups were not accepted by the army. The army would check if the soldiers they commanded drank alcohol, prayed, and if their wives wore religious attire. The pious could even be expelled from the military. So how did the Gulenists manage to conceal their presence? Critics of Gulen say the key to his power is persuading his followers that he is a messianic savior. Many of those who infiltrated the state were allegedly chosen as impressionable children at Gulenist schools. Güneş newspaper editor-in-chief Turgay Güler points out how important this aspect of the story is.
Eğer siz bir insanı If you try to change someone's belief system in his 30s, that could be considered brainwashing. But they started off with 13 and 14-year-old youngsters. They looked for children who are poor and smart. They were made to believe that religion was whatever Fethullah Gulen said, that he was the Messiah. Every day they were watching tapes of Gulen's speeches for hours on end and studying his books. All this was handled in a professional way, almost like they were hypnotized.
Ama aynı zamanda silahlı bir terör örgütü.
Yeni Şafak online editor-in-chief Ersin Şalik highlights the seriousness of this situation.
Kendine ait bir ordusu olduğunu.
We've just started to realize FETÖ has its own army, and their schools are part of this. They select and spot recruits while they're in kindergarten, take them under their wing, and when they grow up, they dictate to them what to study at university that best help them at the time. If they need judges to manipulate the law, then they're sent to law school. If they need generals, then they go to military academy. If they need high-ranking police officers, then police academy. That's why this operation took 30 years to prepare.
İş bölümü de var kendi aralarında.
Nasıl gizlemişler kendilerini? 25 sene asker içinde, yargı içinde.
People cannot seem to fathom how they hid so well in the military, the judiciary and police force. How did they hide themselves so well? Fethullah Gulen found ways that would make Satan proud. For instance, in the armed forces, judiciary and high posts of the police force, he would give his men two commands. One was to hide their identities. He let them know that the military would test to see how pious they were by checking if they drank alcohol. In this practice, for this occasion, Gulen allowed them to drink alcohol, even though it is not permitted in Islam. In order to achieve our ultimate goal, you may drink alcohol temporarily, he told them. So they did these things, and nobody ever realized who these people were because they drank alcohol and stopped praying.
The Gulenists reportedly did all they could to get ahead and then pull their fellow members up with them.
They made their way up to some of the highest posts in the government. Even President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's closest military aide was a Gulenist. Some members of the military leadership were held captive and handcuffed by the men closest to them. Fethullah Gulen knows very well that Brutus killed Caesar. He is aware that the most effective betrayals come from those closest to you. So he placed many Brutus-like followers of his everywhere within the state. But don't get it wrong, he isn't trying to form some sort of Islamic state or a government run by his interpretation of Islam. He wanted to take over the system and people within the system.
In order to get into a governmental position in Turkey, one must take the KPSS exam. The Gulenists would allegedly steal the exam questions and distribute it to organization member students beforehand. So, Gulenists were very successful on the exam and were able to bypass those who didn't have insider knowledge of the exams. The media alleged the Gulenists were doing this for a number of years, but the judiciary failed to take action. Many believe because it was in the hands of the Gulenists.
Yapının özelliği şu.
The organization's aim is not just to seize the army, but all aspects of power. Information and power is what is the most to them. They built a system in which they could steal exam questions. Then they gave the answers to young followers who they wanted in the army. Then come the shock camps, which require extreme physical endurance. The commanders of those shock camps were from FETÖ, so they would pass their own people and fail others. Then they blackmailed their rivals, taping everything they said and did. For example, they even planted a camera in the bedroom of a high-ranking general, so their recruits would rise very quickly through the army. They not only penetrated the army, but also the judiciary and the police. They would falsely frame everyone they wanted out of the way, so their members could quickly climb to the top without obstacles.
According to Şener, the Gulenist world is a secluded one.
Bunu ancak insanların anlaması için bunların her birinin
I'll break it down. These followers have the same mindset of Daesh's suicide bombers, and they are similarly blind followers. It has its own NGOs, charity organizations, supermarkets, hotels, and other living establishments. So you know how the Turkish government now refers to them as a parallel state? These guys have created a parallel existence. And everything you eat, drink, and encounter within that chain is from the same climate. You do not inhale anything else, only what exists within that sphere. And everything other than your kind is the enemy. It's basically a cult. And people commit so strongly that they even sacrifice their own lives, jobs, and lifestyle for this group. Fethullah tells people this all the time during his sermons. There are examples of it. He displays himself as a devotee to this movement, and they consider him a savior.
For years, Nurettin Veren worked first as a teacher, then as a journalist, with close ties to Gulen. But once you're in the club, it can be very hard to get out. When Nurettin Veren discovered that Gulen wanted to use religion to manipulate the organization's students and militarize them, he wanted out.
Orada bulunduğumuz bir zamandaki çekimde, yani toplantıda.
When we were at the meeting once, he said, "You must take over the military, judiciary, police and the civil service. Penetrate into their lifelines and conceal yourselves." So such a speech worried me. I said, "The government that had sympathy towards us to this day will now consider us a terrorist organization." After expressing my discomfort, Gulen lost all trust in me.
Şimdi bu kadar büyük bir yanlış.
Veren says that wasn't the end of it, though.
2005 yılında
Since 2005, there have been 10 assassination attempts made on my life. These were covered by the media. They were recorded. The security forces were informed. However, they keep sweeping it under the rug as the police were also under his control then.
While the Gulenist movement expelled disobedient members, it also demanded the organization's constant growth, especially financially.
Şimdi son çıkan bir şey var mesela.
I know a businessman in Istanbul who donates over $50 million to the Gulenist organization annually. One person, 50 million. They collect funds in several other countries. Their new source of money is Europe, especially Germany. Huge sums are collected in Germany. Fethullah Gulen is a man who controls billions.
Himmet tabir edilen,
Even though it is believed that all of its financial strength comes from donations, defined as himmet, we are face to face with a terror organization that has a huge empire of enterprises. They have companies in health, education, the media, and more all around the world. And whenever they encountered rival competition for them, they would have their members in the police force arrest the senior managers of that company. They would force them to close down the business, just like what happened in the case of Dost Insurance Company.
güce hükmeden bir yapının
In 1999, Gulen defected to the US, where he has remained ever since. Turkey has requested Gulen's extradition, but the US says it will review the evidence. Şener says he himself is walking evidence.
Hatta bazıları belge
Some ask me for documents. I tell them I am the document, with my experiences. They tread on me and crushed me.
Some claim that Gulen and his organization are a tool of the U.S. They point to the fact that longtime former vice chairman of CIA, Graham Fuller, wrote a letter of recommendation when Gulen was applying for a U.S. green card. Fuller says he supported Gulen because he found his movement to be moderate, tolerant, and non-violent. Others would beg to differ.
Fethullah Gülen bana göre bir proje.
In my opinion, Fethullah Gulen is a US project, and he could not have done all this on his own. We now have solid evidence and documents. When Gulen went to the States, the FBI and Immigration Office did not want to grant him a green card, so the CIA followed it up.
Some people strongly supported Fethullah Gulen getting a green card so that he could live in the US. The CIA's former vice chairman, Graham Fuller, was the highest-ranking official involved.
CIA üzerine düştü.
It is fascinating that a senior CIA officer, Graham Fuller, said that Gulen would be a very beneficial addition to the US. But for the first time, Gulen's intimacy with the CIA came to the surface.
Kefil oldu.
Bence Fethullah Gülen
I think the US does not consider Fethullah Gulen to be an organization just limited to Turkey. Gulenists can be seen all over the world, even in parts of Asia and Central Asia. Recently, they have been acting to America's new foreign policy regarding Asia. So when we look at the South Asian countries, there are countless Gulenist schools and organizations established in the region. I even mapped this out and located all the Gulenist schools and institutions around the globe. Then I mapped out the American military bases, and it seems they are in a perfect correlation. So in other words, the Gulenist outposts are almost like operational American bases.
Fethullah Gülen onlara çok lazım bir adam.
Fethullah Gulen is an important man to the US. We have a saying in Turkish, you wouldn't stop feeding grass to a cow that you milk. The US won't stop feeding the cow they milk, so they will want to utilize Gulen till he expires. But keep in mind there is very solid proof that Gulen was involved in the coup attempt. What's the most important one? The Chief of Defence Staff, the commander of the Turkish Armed Forces, said that when he was held hostage by an officer, they offered to get him to speak to Fethullah Gulen. Why are they offering for him to speak to Gulen?
The Gulenist organization has established more than 2,000 schools across the world, but many countries are starting to wake up to the threat they could represent.
Yani bu uluslararası bir proje.
The Fethullah Gulen movement is an international project. Apart from its student dormitories, its Turkish schools that are built in foreign countries are a big part of this project. Russian authorities in Moscow found out that the teachers at their schools are CIA agents, so they closed down all of Fethullah Gulen's schools in Russia. Now, people are realizing that Fethullah and the CIA are working together.
Bu işin içerisinde CIA var.
There are other countries that are vulnerable to a situation like the failed military coup on July 15. The Gulenist terror organization can always be used as a weapon to initiate something like this, so they can keep those countries under their control. So that's the main reason. The second reason is because lately there's a huge difference in the political stance in the Middle East between the West and Turkey, and Fethullah Gulen will only be returned if they agree on a similar stance, which I highly doubt. But as long as America, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and Iraq have a different political stance on the Middle East, then Fethullah Gulen will always remain a valuable weapon.
A News Channel Head of Foreign Policy Desk reporter Orhan Salih stresses how grave the situation is.
Amerikan istihbaratı, Amerikan intelijansı bu kişiyi neden koruyor?
Why is American intelligence protecting this person? Is American intelligence personally protecting everyone there? What's in it for them? Fethullah Gulen is not just a threat to Turkey, but to the whole Western world. When you take a look at the history of all the radical factions that the U.S. has supported, they have pointed their guns back at the U.S. itself in time. The U.S. supported the Taliban in Afghanistan. Then what happened? Osama bin Laden targeted America. The Taliban and other radical groups the U.S. supported were not living on American soil. That's why FETÖ is such a danger to the U.S. Gulen has 200 schools in the USA. Their students are American children. They will be the future bureaucrats, politicians, generals, and police officers in key official U.S. establishments.
İnanılmaz bir paraya yatırım yapıyor.
Amerika bu darbe girişiminde
Yes, the US and some European countries had ties with Fethullah's terrorist organization. We want to continue our relationship with our allies, but we want it to be honest and honorable.
What many journalists have in common is that they believe the West might have had a part in the coup attempt, but this attempt has been defeated by people's power.
böyle bir saldırıya
This is a nation that stood up against such a bloody attack, risking their own lives. People from every walk of life and every political party came together that night. The West should think about this. One day, if something similar to this coup attempt takes place in one of their countries, will they find the courage to stand in front of tanks, bullets and bombs? As a nation, we have fought for democracy.
Onlara karşı bir mücadele verebilir mi?
While Turkish people may still have their differences, there's one issue that enjoys near unanimous agreement. The country's future belongs to them.